Hey, Holly.
Howdy.
I think we're here. We're live.
Okay.
Yeah, here we're live. Okay.
Yep,
Well, hey everyone. You can hear me okay?
I can hear you
There we
okay.
go. Yes, everyone can hear me okay. Okay, nice. And my headset's working. Okay. We both sound great. So thanks everyone for joining. I have the pleasure to be chatting with Holly Firestone here, who's had an illustrious career, but is now at Holly Firestone Consulting. And to kick things off, I was just thinking it'd be great for Holly for you to share your origin story. I feel like there's always like this circuitous route to becoming coming into the world of community, or in my case, marketing. So I think that's a good starting point, and we can kind of talk about your take that as a like foundation for where to start the conversation. So let's kick
Sounds
it off.
great. And thank you, Kevin. Thanks y'all for having me. I'm excited to share anything and everything here. First off, I would like to start with an apology. I am extraordinarily congested. I am 7 months pregnant, and this is one of the beautiful symptoms of being pregnant. So I apologize if I'm sniffling a little and sound very congested, but we'll work through it. We'll get through it. So hopefully y'all can understand me, and I'll try to speak a little slower. So my journey is interesting. I mean, honestly, it could probably go way back to high school, which was 1,000 years ago. I was in a youth group, a Jewish youth group called BBYO, and I was in charge of all like the member intake and member coordination, and that was my jam. I loved it. I did it for years, and it took me a while in my career to really connect the dots back to that and realize this is something that I've just always kind of naturally been inclined to do. But skip forward a bunch of years, and I was working at a nonprofit, building community there, and that they lost some funding and closed all the offices. So I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I didn't really connect the nonprofit community building that I was doing with what the world was doing in terms of community, especially in like tech and SaaS, because I had never been in tech or SaaS or anything like that. So I started just kind of looking at different job postings to see what would be the most interesting one, what just sounded right to me. So I found a post for a role called Marketplace Community Manager at TaskRabbit. And I read it and I was like, oh, yes, this is everything I want to do. And so I applied for it and I didn't get it. Went through a few interviews, but didn't get it ultimately. And so I started digging into that more and looking up what community manager meant and where they were hiring for community managers. And I didn't have a lot of luck. I mean, this was over a decade ago. So I wasn't really seeing much of what I wanted to see. So I had some background in events, and I went to apply for an events role at Atlassian, which didn't end up working out. But I was like it was down to two candidates, and they hired someone else. But one of the people I interviewed with was hiring for a community manager. So they called me and said, would you be interested in this? And I was like, that's actually what I want to be doing. So yes, I would be very interested in this. And so that's how I jumped into the tech world, starting with Atlassian. It was an incredible experience. Atlassian's an absolutely amazing company, and I cherish all of my time there. And then from there, I went to Salesforce. Joining the Salesforce community. Originally, I started with the MVP and user group programs, and then just took on more and more in the community team and all of that. And then from Salesforce, I went to Venafi. Venafi was a great experience too, because I was on the executive leadership team. So I was reporting directly to our CEO, and community being prioritized at that level, I think makes a huge difference in how it is accepted by the rest of the organization, and the things that you're able to do and the education that you're able to give other teams about community. So that was a really, really great experience. I learned a ton. I learned a ton about, presenting to the board and, just these higher level things and the way that community could filter into them. And then I left and started my own consulting practice, which I'm doing part-time right now, until I take some mat leave, and then I'm going to come back and regroup and get rolling on that again. But it has been an interesting journey along the whole way. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of in that journey is that I started as a community, I think like associate or community specialist, and worked my way all the way up to the exec team. So, I could empathize with my team the whole way along, no matter what they were doing. I've been there and I've done that. And I also have learned a ton from my teams too. So it's been an interesting journey. That is a long-winded answer, but it's, it's wonky. As you said, it was going to be wonky. So
Yeah, I mean, imagine where you would be if you did get that job at TaskRabbit. It might be have a whole different conversation or a whole different career path. So
I
we're
know.
lucky you ended up where you are, so you could share all your knowledge with everyone here.
Yeah.
One so many things are coming up. I definitely want to get back to like the executive seat at the table, because like that's really interesting, and one of the things, like areas we wanted to get into. But I guess since you've had like this long, I mean, I don't know how long community's been a thing. Like 10 years is like in the space is quite a long time. So I'm like wondering if you could share like how you've seen things change over the course of the years, and like what's maybe different now than it was like 5 or 10 years ago.
There are a lot of things that are the same. There are a lot of the things that are different. So 10 years ago, obviously, totally different ball game. But community existed well before that. User groups were happening long, long ago. Apple's had a support community since the 80s, probably. So it's just taken on new life forms, just like all technology and technology roles have. I will say, when I took my first job at that nonprofit as a community manager, I was living in San Francisco and I was making $38,000 a year 10 years ago. That is, even 10 years ago, or actually it was like 13 or 14 years ago, but that is not enough to live on in San Francisco. That is
Definitely
not
not.
not a living wage. And that's the thing that I remember coming across, in the very beginning of this journey, is that community was undervalued. And the reason I think that I have been in it this long, a lot of people just couldn't afford to take a community job at that point. Even if they wanted to, it just wouldn't work out. It was not sustainable. So the fact that I did that is the reason that I've been with it so long. It just wasn't a fair situation. So it's really interesting to look back and think about that. I hope that makes sense. So like,
Mhm.
we see so many people that have entered the field in the last 5 years because it's recognized more now and people are compensated appropriately for it and teams are being built out a lot more. I'm not saying everywhere, but we are seeing much more value put on community and the community professional, which wasn't the case back then. So you had to really, 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 really want it to do it back then and make no money. And so that's why I think there's so few people that have been doing it this long. Or they, have done something kind of close to it and then switched into it. So I think that's the biggest change that I've seen over this period of time, is just that it's become more recognized and it's become more valued. And even the entry level community roles, you're seeing a huge jump.
Yeah, I mean, being outside of it, I've definitely noticed it in the last 5 years, where it's like this is a role, like this is a function. So I've certainly like seen that like kind of come to fruition. It's still nascent, but yeah, definitely come a long way as far as
Yeah.
like my outsider perspective. One thing I forgot to mention for the group and the people here is that you can enter questions into the chat, and then like there's also this emoji function which it looks like people have caught on to. So any questions that you see that are fire or thumbs up, feel free to like we'll kind of curate those as we go along. I very much want it to be like interactive and not just me and Holly having a conversation, although that's what we're doing right now. So
yeah, definitely want tons of questions. Pretty much nothing's off limits, so y'all just go for it.
Yeah, we do have like a lot of people, like the topic of this talk is around return on community, which is like a play on return on investment, I guess. So it's like what how are we looking at community and what business impact does it have? But I think like a good starting point for the folks here too is like how do you define community? Like in the context of this conversation, like how should we be thinking about community? Is it like your own stuff, or is it like outside of that? Like how do you think about it? How to define community?
Well, defining community, it's interesting. I think it depends on the audience you're talking to. Like if I'm talking to an exec team, I'm going to define it entirely differently than if I'm defining it to the marketing team, because you always want to be able to put that lens on for them that shows them there's value for them. But when you think about community in terms of like, is it something you own and it's branded, or is it the larger community? I kind of look at community as capital C is the one that you own. It's your brand. It's your you're funding it or providing resources for it. And then lowercase c is like your larger community, which is generally a mix of communities that makes up an audience.
Yeah. And then so for the teams that are like owning the community, is it like, how do you like when you're in the seat, like where do you start? Is it like starting with the big C or the little C, or is it like depend on like where your customers are at in their journey? Like maybe they're already a community for you and you just like don't even know it. So can you
Right.
talk a little about that? Yeah.
I think it can come from, I mean, well, you usually don't have a big C if you're just getting started. You don't have like a community that's branded and that people are in and gathering around, but you do know who's talking to your product team and really invested that way. You do know who's talking to each other. Sometimes things do happen organically. And so it's just looking for where those things exist and then starting to talk to those people and get feedback and better understanding how you can provide value for them if you do build out some sort of community program, either online or offline, or you have to understand your audience to be able to do that. So starting with your most engaged audience isn't the worst place to go just to get feedback.
Is there a sign where you like know like, okay, we're getting so much pull here, like we need to invest in this? Or like what's the, I guess another way of putting it is like, what's the right time to invest in a community?
I mean, I think right from the beginning, obviously I'm going to say that I'm completely biased, but there's no reason to not, you've got people that are using your product right off the bat. It doesn't have to be that you buy a community platform and, you spend all this money, but you can start with a small community of people that are using your product and giving you feedback and talking to each other and helping each other and giving each other ideas. So, you can do that in a more informal way. And especially if it's starting really small, 5, 10 people, and you're just, building out conversations with them, it can be really, can be really manual, I guess, for lack of better words, and starting groups where they're just talking to each other. I don't think waiting is a great idea to start talking. I mean, to start talking to your customers and having your customers talk to each other. Why? Why wait?
And then with that, like when you're starting, like what is the right like team sizing or like investment that should be put into that?
Yeah, I mean, that is entirely dependent on the strategy that you come up with. They spend, weeks building out, doing discovery and understanding the company's goals and understanding the team's goals and what stakeholders are looking for. So I really, it's hard to answer that without knowing, without building a full strategy to say, this is the team that I think you need to accomplish what you want to accomplish in this time period.
Yeah, I guess that gets to like, some of the questions here that we're seeing too is like, how does community fit into the business strategy, or like what comes first? It's like a chicken or the egg. Like, do you go from the business strategy and like see how community fits into it, or like do you facilitate and get a thriving community and then like figure out how that fits into the business strategy? Or like what has worked in your past?
Yeah, good luck getting resources and money if it's not going to fit into the business strategy, right? So it's taking the time in the beginning to really understand what you're trying to get out of community and understand other expectations. Your leadership team might have a completely different view than you do. And if your leadership team is expecting, support deflection, that's like that's they're gung-ho in their head, that's what they need, then like you really have to think about how that integrates into your strategy and then how you're going to prove that.
I think actually,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think I'm going to pull up a question here from the audience that like it kind of builds on top of that, is like, okay, how do we, we know we need to like map to business outcomes and business objectives. Like, how do we like show the work or show the receipts for this investment is paying off? I think it's a question that a lot of people have on their mind right now. Yeah.
So here's the tricky thing. Some community teams are on the marketing team. Some community teams are on the customer success team. Some community teams are on, everybody's everywhere. And so when you think about building out your community strategy, ultimately your goals have to roll up to your team goals, which roll up to your company goals. And that's why I struggle a lot when community falls under marketing, because it's not the first place that I would choose. It's not the first place that I would choose to spend my time building out the ROI model for community. I think that there's some, other KPIs that I would like to look at. So this question very specifically is asking about customer retention and revenue. I don't know how in the weeds you want me to get with this, but here's just an example. If you have some kind of customer health score, okay, partnering with your customer success team and saying, okay, we've got this customer health score, and we want to take all these people that have low scores, and we're going to do a campaign to drive them to the community. Okay, so you'll figure out how to take these low scoring companies or individuals and drive them to community and see what happens when one person joins, when two people join, when they return to the community, different activities in the community. And proving out that score changing is, you can directly relate that to the community versus just saying, well, people are in the community spend more. Well, yeah, probably, because they're happier with you, they're spending more time and they're great. Like that's a great correlation to the community, and certainly they're going to give you good feedback on that as a resource, and that's important too, as MPS of the community and pulling in feedback. But you want to have some tighter ties to actual numbers and how it's impacting. So if you see that the score is going up, and you can tie that to different activity in the community, and then you can see that they renew it at a higher rate, or they're no longer in the red, or whatever it is that you're looking at. And this is a very broad example because everybody's company is different, but I think that that's an example of how you could tie it back to community. Another one for you want to tie it to dollars as you think about support deflection. And there's an algorithm that you can use to say, conservatively say how much your community is deflecting from your support team. We had that at Salesforce. We had an algorithm. We were saving $2 million a month. Granted, Salesforce is giant, obviously, but that was a conservative estimate. So those are the numbers that, kept us driving forward and kept us getting the resources that we needed to grow and expand.
Yeah, makes sense. I hate to use the word quick win or the phrase quick win, but is there like a good starting point, or maybe not even starting point, just like what is a metric or a way to show value like quickly, versus like having to connect it to like revenue, which is like a long-term like cycle and like even hard to prove attribution and influences. Is there a good starting point for folks? Yeah.
So I look at community metrics in two buckets. The first one's the health bucket, and that is your community growing? Are people returning to your community? Are they engaging in your community? Just activity overall. What is your community doing? If you do not have bucket one, you cannot have bucket two, and bucket two is the ROI metric. So how are you tying this back to your business? And so quick win hurts my heart a little bit, and you knew it was as you were saying it, because the quick wins are really around the health of the community. So getting it to grow and thrive before you can hop over to this next bucket. So I would say that's where you need to focus your time and effort. In terms of value, improving value when you're really only focused on this health bucket, I think it's getting testimonials from your customers that are in the community. This helped me so much because X, and start pulling those quotes. I actually have something on my desktop I call the happy folder. And so when people give really good feedback for me personally, or when they give really good feedback in the community, I just screenshot it and keep it in the folder, because you never know when you're going to need it. Also, if you have a really bad day, which us community folks, sometimes do, it's nice to just go digging through your happy folder. But I think those quotes that you get are some of the ways that you can highlight, especially if they're from some of your enterprise customers or, a target audience that that your leadership team is really interested in, and say like, okay, we're just getting started, but this is some of the feedback that we're getting.
Yeah, that's a good reminder for folks here, I guess. Like we have Rebecca leads our community team at Common Room, and certainly she surfaces up things like that to our whole entire org, that the community's feedback from the community, and then also direction for product and other stuff like that. So it's certainly like, even though when you're posting something like that or sharing something like that, it may seem like it's just going to one person, but it definitely permeates like a lot of different folks. At least for us at Common Room, like we see a lot of that, and it's like it's really uplifting, and then also sometimes hard at the same time when you get hard feedback around something that didn't go so well. So. But I mean, it's a really great channel for a really great source for us to get the right kind of intel and right type of information. I wanted to go back to, I don't know if it's going back, just talk about your having a seat at the table versus like different teams that you've been on. And I do feel like it's kind of common for community to be into marketing, but I wonder if you, let's start with just like, where do you think that community should sit within an org? If it should be like a siloed separate thing that reports up to the CEO, or like what part of the org should it like fit in?
I mean, I had a really good experience with it reporting up to the CEO, because then community had, I had a view of what was going on in the company and how community could fit into that. So I could try things that I had never really had the opportunity to try before, because it just wasn't in the conversation, right? Those things didn't filter down. But I know that's not the reality in a lot of situations. So, I think it would sit under like a chief customer officer, customer success. Support isn't the worst place for community, and sometimes that sits under, chief customer officer. It really just depends on what your goals are for your community too. I'm not saying it can't work in marketing. Of course, like there's tons of communities that are in marketing and they're working, but when you think about your leadership, your CMO, you really have to be on the same page with them, that you're also going to be trying to focus on KPIs outside of just marketing KPIs. You have to, because community touches every part of the business. And so you're really, you're not taking full advantage of what you've built if you're not thinking about the entire experience internally and externally with community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, especially with marketing or even like sales, the incentives could be misaligned where you're tapping into community for the wrong reasons, then it's going to like hamper things, or you're not looking at the long term. So I'm curious like how you kind of navigate that, like maybe like differing objectives or different like what's good for the community might not be good for the business and vice versa. So I'm curious like how you like go about navigating that, or like your approach to making sure that like both things are aligned.
I'm not sure I'm totally following. So what's good for the business isn't necessarily, or what's good for the
Oh,
community isn't necessarily good for the business, or
yeah,
tell me
sorry.
more
I
what you mean
should
by that.
frame this more like, say like a business objective is like, we want to drive revenue, and that revenue could be like, let's tap into the community. But like by doing that, it leaves a bad taste in everyone in the community's mouth. It's like
Mhm.
not the right thing for a thriving community to like work well. So like,
Right.
there's like those two differing types of objectives, and like, how would you go about like navigating that? Is more of the
Sure.
question. Is that more
Yeah,
clear?
absolutely. And I don't think the objectives are necessarily incompatible. I think it's just the way that you go about doing them. So if you're looking at driving revenue to the community, going into the community and trying to sell in the community, not going to work, and your community is going to hate you, and then everybody's upset. But there's other things that you can do that you can kind of pull back into revenue. And so, I'm trying to think like off the top of my head, you know, different a great example is at Salesforce. We found out that 91% of the people that were in the community found out about new products and services through other people in the community. So, we don't have the exact dollar amount, but we know that that's where people are getting information about new products and services that they're interested in learning more about. So that is like quick example off the top of my head, but I think it's just figuring out how to get the right resources in front of the people in your community that are adding value for them. It has to add value for them
Hmm. Hmm.
before you think about how it's going to add value for your business. And that value will come, and then you can quantify it.
And what are some signs that you're adding value? Is it just like anecdotal feedback, like this was really great, or inviting others to the community? Is there like a starting point for like, oh, how do I know that I'm adding value to our community? Maybe it goes back to the engagement metrics that we were talking about before.
Adding value for the customer specifically, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways. Certainly you need to be doing well, I won't say you need, everybody's different, but I like to do community feedback surveys. So hearing from the community on their experience, like, and also you could do an NPS survey for the community as well, so if it's adding value there. Another thing is, uh, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of ways, and of course my brain is blanking right now. But it's talking to people in the community and getting their feedback. If you have something like an ideas platform and you see tons of customers are adding to that platform and voting each other's ideas up, and then those ideas get implemented, like you're adding value, because those are the things that your customers want to be happening in your community. And then I just one other thing about driving revenue that I completely blanked on but should have mentioned is that the community itself gets to be a tool in in your sales team's toolkit, right? So sales team is selling your product and say, you buy our product and you get this thriving,
Mm,
amazing resource of a community with it. And that should be a talking point. And the community is definitely part of a selling point for customers. You know, we did a survey of customers again at Salesforce. I mean, we did it a bunch at Atlassian too. That was 1,000 years ago, but you know, I believe it was 83% said that they saw a higher return on their investment in the product because they had the community as a resource. So I think there's things like that you can look at as well that tie it back to whichever team is trying to gain value or understand the value.
yeah, I love that positioning or that like that framing of things, that it's like a value add for your customers. That's like such a great way of putting it. I love that idea. Um, I'm gonna call on someone from the audience, Nikki, who
Hi,
I know.
Nikki.
Hi, Nikki. Everyone knows Nikki probably.
Yeah.
And you brought up questions around, or you brought up surveying and NPS
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I wonder how you survey your community without fatiguing them. Or this question from Nikki here.
Yeah. It depends. I feel like all my answers say that, but it depends. Larger scale, like community survey, I would say once a year. If you just want to do like a quick pop-up question, you can pretty much do that anytime. I wouldn't go over like monthly or quarterly. But then for programs, so like an MVP program or user group program, twice a year. That's what I did. You know, I don't know. Is that best practice? I don't know. It's just what I did. And it seemed to work. And I got the information that I needed from them about their respective programs or what they're looking for and that.
Is there any survey that you thought was like really insightful or like led to really great insightful results, like for
Ev-
community
every
managers
single
or
one.
anyone?
Every
Yeah.
single one. Every single one,
So I
definitely.
can think of like
I
NPS, product market fit, like there's all this product feedback. Yeah.
Oh, do you mean on a larger scale? I mean, I'm thinking about like just community in general. Like, so these community surveys, we survey the user group leaders and better understand what they're struggling with. And then our entire roadmap for the year was built for them based on the feedback that we heard from them.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what I mean. It's like surveying
Yeah.
the community based on some objective like NPS or product market fit or like all this type of stuff. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but you said they're all valuable. There's not one that like sticks out more than others, I guess.
I don't think so. I think the larger one is really, across the like online community and larger community. That one's tricky because I mean, everybody has an opinion. They're all completely different, so wading through that is really tough. But I do think they're all valuable. Like I would love reading survey feedback. I would love the critical things and the constructive things and the positive things. Because if I had enough people saying this is a problem in the community, it is very easy to go to my leadership and say, this is a problem in the community that we need to invest in fixing for our customers. So I loved those surveys. And so at Atlassian and at Salesforce for the smaller communities within, so like MVP or the user groups, we would survey them, and then at our annual conference, so Summit for Atlassian, Dreamforce for Salesforce, I would share the results with them. I would tell them what everybody said. This has gone up, this has gone down, this is what you're saying. And then I would share the roadmap with them for the next year. So say, based on your feedback and what we've heard, this is where we're going. And just being super open and honest with them, because those are the leaders in our community. And we want that open line of communication. And it's also, I think they were fascinated to see that we would get completely opposite answers. They would think that exactly what they wanted was what everybody wanted, and it would open their eyes to say, okay, they're trying to be fair to everybody by doing it X, Y, or Z way. So we're always trying to gather feedback and then be very, very open about what we were doing with that feedback as well.
Yeah, and you brought up, you kind of touched on something that it's interesting around like how you communicate and how you work cross-functionally with the other departments. So yeah, I'm curious like how like what kind of cadence you have with like a marketing lead or a sales lead or a support lead, and like how do you make sure that like what is happening inside the community and the people who you represent is like making its way to other parts of the organization that maybe you don't report into.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could share a little bit how you go about doing that.
Yeah, I think it depends who you are on the team. So, for me at an executive level, I was talking to the exec team, and we had daily stand-ups, and then we had longer meetings twice a week, and then we had our operational review once a month, then we had board meeting once a month. So that was there. And then, my senior leadership, anywhere that I was, they would have some conversations that were regular with their stakeholders. So everybody has their layer of stakeholders that they're communicating to at all times. And it's extremely important, big or small organization, to do that. And then, one thing that I've encouraged a lot of my clients to do is just over communicate. So you start a Slack channel for community and you invite everybody to join and you post updates in there. What is what's going on in the community? Tell your customers about this or whatever it is. That there's just some regular cadence there. One thing that someone on my team, or the two leaders on my team at Venafi started, Tiffany Oda and Sophia Rodriguez Mata, they started a quarterly update on community, and anybody could join. And it was basically a webinar where we talked about everything that's happened in the community over the last quarter so they could see the results themselves. And then I encourage all of my clients to basically do internal education roadshows. So it's a very similar theme across, the deck that they create. There's a lot of similarities, but then you tailor each one to each of those teams. And it's a lot of work, but it pays off because then you get them to start thinking about community. You don't always have to go to them and say, hey, this is what community needs. But like the marketing team, for example, is doing a campaign or they're promoting an event. They know community is part of their process. They have to think about community and where it fits in, because community is a team sport. Everybody has to participate. The community team obviously connects and orchestrates and puts together all the pieces, but every single team has to have a stake in community. And that's another reason I think having a seat at the table is so important too, because you need to be able to go to the leader of these teams and say, this is a priority. We've decided as a business it's a priority, and your team needs to have a goal related to community, so that it's not just something that's kind of an afterthought. Sure, we'll help the community team out, and then it gets pushed and pushed and pushed. It's a priority. It's part of their job. And that's a really important part of the internal communication too.
Yeah. I also like good job of like positioning things the right way, where it's like, this is something that you as a product lead or a marketing lead or ops lead can like tap into, and it's like a value add for you. It's not just like an update of like, here's what's going on. I love that like framing too. Yeah. I from your previous talks, I know that you have shared stats that are like, community has influenced 2x, or like there's 2x more revenue from people who started in the community. I don't have it pulled up now, but like there's a lot of ROI
since we've been talking too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So like I'm curious like how you connected the dots between those things with because I think a lot of people are kind of in positions of community are like they need to make requests of data and analytics folks or the sales and rev ops folks, and like how do you go about like doing that and connecting the dots from like what you're doing is actually leading to like this business outcome?
Yep. So almost exactly like what I was just saying. It can't be that you kind of go to the data science team and say, hey, when you guys get some time, is there any way you could look into this for me? No, it needs to be just on somebody's, it needs to be somebody's role. Either you have them on your community team, which I don't recommend, I could go into why, but having somebody on the data science team that you are one of their stakeholders, they have marketing, they have sales, they have community, so they are thinking about this. And it's part of their role. They're building out your dashboards. They're reporting everything to you. There's no other way for that to work. And that's, again, goes back to the seat at the table, that your CRO or whoever's managing that team, your COO, they have to be bought in and say, we are going to resource for this, period. Just like we resource for the other teams to do this, because you can't expect that your community team, sure, like there's some things that community team can do, and I highly recommend having an ops person on your community team, and it's a whole other thing to go into, but the data science team, they're the experts, and they need to be well versed in this and working with your team to understand how to show what's going on in the community.
How important do you think it is to just be at a company that like gets it versus like trying to make the case? Like I feel like that if you don't join a company that understands that like it's valuable, is probably like an uphill battle that maybe people aren't willing to fight. Is that like a prerequisite that you would look for if like you're starting and like doing a job search? Or I don't know.
I don't know if I've ever started a company that gets it in the way that I would want them to. Like even at Venafi, I reported to the CEO, but getting the other execs on the exec team to understand what community is and why I was reporting to the CEO and the role that their team plays and prioritizing it, that was an uphill battle. I mean, the same at Salesforce. Salesforce, has a thriving and incredible community, but getting resources was certainly still an uphill battle, because I think that the value of community, we've finally gotten to a point where people are like, okay, community is really valuable, but the value of a community professional is another thing. Like, I think a lot of execs think it just magically appears. You have people that are active, they're super excited, nothing goes wrong, and it just goes. It's just magic, right? And so that is the challenge. There's tons of challenges that I still see across every organization that I've ever been at, in terms of how they resource community and how they view community and see the value of community. So yeah, I mean, in a dream world, I would go somewhere where they automatically understood community, but I don't
Doesn't
know
exist.
if I've ever, I'm not sure. I mean, even Salesforce, it was tricky because Salesforce loves their community, but I don't think, necessarily the leadership team understood the ins and outs of how it got built to the place that it was at, and how to maintain and grow that. And that's, it's tricky. And Salesforce even had a community product. So, I think that it's just all about education, and getting internal teams
The
to
stuff we
grasp.
talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question selfishly for myself, and then we can turn it over to the group here on the call. The last question I have is just like, if you imagine yourself starting out at, pick a company, Atlassian, Salesforce, Venafi, like what advice would you give to yourself, knowing what you know now? That's too hard.
No, I mean, it's so different, because I entered all of those at very different stages in my career. And so, starting at I worked so hard at Atlassian. I was working 16-hour days. I'd work through the US day, the Australian day. And I was just in a completely different place, and I regret it / don't regret it, because I don't think anybody should do that. That's just crazy. So I think, the advice that I would give myself in that position is stick to your guns. I did. I mean, I had some, a lot of uphill battles to fight when I was there, and I was very stubborn, and I think that served me well. Not stubborn to the point where I was trying to be difficult, but stubborn to the point that I did everything in my power to protect our customers. And I'm still so proud of that to this day. But the advice that I would give myself is probably to continue to do that and to work less. Nobody's gonna die if X, Y, and Z doesn't happen. Salesforce, kind of the same thing. Nobody's gonna die if X, Y, and Z doesn't happen.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because I was like more mature in my I know, but I was like more mature in my my career. And then I would say at Salesforce, I really started building and growing myself as a leader, and not working my team too hard was one of the biggest regrets. We went through a period where we were migrating platforms, and it was really hard on everyone, and I would take it back 1,000 times over if I could. And they know that. And then, Venafi, going into that, I think it's just, as an exec, just soaking it all in as much as I can, understanding how the business works, P&L, the board meetings, everything, doing as much of that as I could. So it's so different at every level.
I know I said that was the last question, but I also how did the exec role at Venafi come to fruition? Was that something that they were actively looking for? Is that something you knew someone and you made a case for? Because I feel like that's not often a role that's open and out there.
Yeah, I started out as head of community under the CMO. The CMO left, and I made a case to the CEO, and he absolutely agreed. He really, really understood community. He himself was a user group leader in I want to say the 70s, 80s. I don't know. So he got it, and he really wanted to try it. He really wanted to see how it would work, and he's great. He gets community.
Cool. Okay, thanks. Well, that's enough for me. So let me, I have this question from Greg here that is pretty interesting that I'll pull up. So yeah, with so many community platforms, how do you meet your customers where they are versus where you want them to be? Slack, Discord, Circle, something else? Can you attempt at answering this tough question?
It's a very tough question. When I am talking to, I guess best experience here is when I'm talking to my clients. It really starts with discovery and understanding what they're expecting to get out of this and what resources that they have, what their stakeholders are expecting to get out of this. And that changes my answer completely. A B2B community being dispersed in a bunch of places is really hard to prove and show value because you don't own it. But what works for B2B may not work for B2C. So it really just depends on what you're trying to accomplish and how many of your customers live in all these other places. If you really want to move to a branded platform, but you've got a bunch of people in Slack, you can't just wholesale say, I guess you could say, we're shutting down the Slack bye. I think you'll lose a lot of people that way. But if you create just immense value in the new place that you're going, and you'll slowly have people that are starting to trickle over, and also just getting feedback. Why do they want to be on this platform versus this one? And try to bridge that gap, so that you can manage everything in one place if that's what's right for your community.
There's a nice segue into this question, which you kind of already answered, but any specific advice around how to migrate to a new platform? And thanks,
Run
Tracy,
the other
for
way.
helping me
Just
out with
run.
that one. Yeah.
Run the other way. I think
Yeah.
it's just being as open as possible. So if you've got a committed community, telling them in advance, getting them feedback, having your top contributors play a role in the new platform you pick by giving you, more information about what they're looking for, and then having them work with you on the migration, and just, again, open communication well in advance. That's my best advice.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm looking for more questions coming in through. It's hard for me to multitask and look through and also listen.
Sure. Maybe I can also.
But yeah, if there's anything that comes up in here, you can highlight it, highlight message, and it'll show up on the bottom there. Can you? I forget what else we haven't, but we haven't answered so far. But thanks everyone for the feedback here. I think we could probably call it the end here. And then Holly, can you just share where people can reach you, what you're up to, how do people get in contact if you want them to be in contact?
Yeah. So like I said, I started my own consulting practice part-time, which has been flying the plane while I'm building it. But if you want to reach out to me, I think LinkedIn is the right place. It used to be Twitter. Rest in peace. So I guess LinkedIn's probably the best place to reach out to me, and it's just Holly Firestone, or I think it's Holly G Firestone. And yeah, I'm going to be sticking around for a little bit, and then I'm going to be fully taking off, starting in October until sometime early next year. I'm growing a human, so that's fun. Building my own home community, but yeah, LinkedIn's the place to go.
Well, congrats, and thank you so much, Holly. It's been a pleasure, and we'll follow up with the recording, and see you all on the community. Okay, bye.